The great hall of the Galactic Council glowed with silver light. The air was thick with the sound of alien voices, sharp laughter, and the soft hum of translators. At the center, standing on a raised platform, was the human ambassador. His suit was clean but plain compared to the flowing robes and jeweled armor of the alien delegates. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the hope of billions waiting back on Earth. For the first time in history, humanity was asking to be part of something greater, the council that ruled the stars. He spoke with dignity, his words measured and clear. He explained how Earth had struggled, how wars had ended, and how humanity had reached the stars through determination and sacrifice. He spoke of cooperation, of trade, of wanting to stand among equals, not as conquerors, but as partners. His voice carried a strength that came not from wealth or power, but from belief. For a moment, there was silence. For a moment, some believed his words might reach the council's cold hearts. Then came the laughter. It started with a single delegate, a tall insectoid creature whose clicking voice echoed against the walls. Soon, others joined. Deep roars, hissing chuckles, sharp metallic screeches. All forms of alien laughter filled the chamber. They laughed at his plain clothing, at Earth's fragile ships, at the small population of humans compared to the vast empires. They laughed at the very idea that humanity could stand as an equal among ancient civilizations that had ruled for thousands of years. The ambassador's voice faltered. He stood tall, refusing to show anger, but inside he felt the sting of humiliation. He saw how the alien leaders whispered to one another, their expressions twisted with amusement. He caught fragments of their words through the translator. Too young, too weak, still children, unworthy. Some didn't even bother to hide their contempt. They turned away, speaking to each other as if he were invisible. One alien lord, his body covered in golden scales, leaned forward and said loudly enough for all to hear, "Humans should crawl back to their little blue world. Let them grow their crops and tell their stories. The stars are for the strong." The council chamber erupted in cruel approval. The ambassador clenched his fists behind his back, nails digging into his palms, but his face stayed calm. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. He looked across the hall. Not a single ally rose to defend him. Not a single voice spoke in favor of Earth. Humanity stood alone. His words had been weighed, measured, and thrown aside like dust. The decision was final. The council rejected humanity's petition. Earth would not join. Earth would remain an outsider, cut off, mocked, and forgotten. Slowly, he lowered his head. The translator device at his ear felt heavy, useless. Every step he took down from the platform echoed like a drumbeat of shame. The aliens continued their laughter, some even mocking his human stride, imitating his walk. The grand doors of the chamber opened as he walked through, and the noise of ridicule followed him out like a poisonous cloud. Outside, the cold corridors of the space station were silent. The ambassador paused, his reflection staring back at him from the polished steel walls. Dirt beneath their boots, that was what the galaxy saw in humans. Yet as he looked at his own reflection, he felt something burning inside. It was not despair. It was not defeat. It was anger, controlled, silent, but deep. He knew what message he would send back to Earth. He would not lie. He would not soften the truth. Humanity had rejected, mocked, and told they were nothing. But he also knew what such rejection would awaken. He could already imagine the faces of leaders, soldiers, scientists, and workers when they heard this. They would not bow their heads forever. The council thought humans were broken. They thought the laughter was the end. But as the ambassador walked away, each step carried a promise. One day the galaxy would regret its laughter. One day the weak would return stronger than any had imagined. One day the name of humanity would not be spoken with scorn, but with fear and respect. He entered his ship in silence. The crew looked at him, their eyes filled with questions. He gave them no speech, only a single order: set course for Earth. The engines roared to life, carrying him home. Behind him, the council continued its session, already forgetting about the small world they had dismissed. But in the shadows of space, something had begun, something that would grow in silence, in secret, and in fury. The ambassador sat by the window as the stars stretched into lines. His hands were steady now, his face calm. The galaxy had closed its doors, but humanity would build their own, and when those doors opened again, they would not open with requests. they would open with power. The laughter of the aliens still echoed in his ears, but it no longer cut him. It fueled him. And he swore silently, staring into the endless dark of space, that one day the galaxy would remember this moment as their greatest mistake. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Every broadcast carried the same words: rejected, humiliated, unworthy. At first, people felt the sting of shame, but it didn't take long for the anger to grow. Cities lit up with protests, not against each other, but against the galaxy that had mocked them. The memory of wars between nations seemed to fade overnight. Old enemies shook hands. Leaders who once refused to speak now shared the same table. Humanity, for the first time, stood together as one. Factories that once built simple machines now turned their focus to something greater. Shipyards expanded beneath oceans, hidden from wandering eyes. Mines on the moon doubled their production, feeding secret furnaces buried in the rock. Mars, once a frontier for scientists and dreamers, became a fortress world where designs for new warships were drawn in silence. The stars above had closed their doors, but humanity was not retreating. They were building in the dark, far from the eyes of those who had laughed. Children grew up under new lessons. In classrooms, teachers no longer spoke only of science and history, but of betrayal, of resilience, of destiny. Stories of the Council's laughter were told with quiet rage, not as tales of defeat, but as sparks to fuel the fire. Generations were raised with a clear purpose. Never again would they stand as beggars before alien thrones. Decades passed. Fleets of ships were tested in hidden asteroid fields, their engines silent, their weapons sharp. Entire colonies vanished from the maps, officially declared abandoned, but in truth they thrived in secrecy. Shielded by technology humanity refused to share. They grew crops in artificial suns, trained soldiers in underground halls, and spread whispers of revenge that would one day rise like thunder. The galaxy, blind and arrogant, believed humanity had gone quiet, too ashamed to return. They called Earth a failed world, a species destined to fade into myth. But in the silence, in the hidden corners of space, humanity was not fading. They were sharpening their claws, building their empire where no one dared to look. The rejection that was meant to bury them had instead bound them together in unbreakable unity. In the shadows, an oath passed from one generation to the next. Humanity would return, not as petitioners, but as rulers. The Council's laughter would not echo forever. One day, the galaxy with a sound of human fleets breaking the silence of the stars. The silence of humanity's disappearance became a mask, and behind it, seeds of destiny were sown. On barren asteroids, colonies thrived beneath armored domes, invisible to trade routes and scanners. Deep beneath the crust of Mars, colossal shipyards stretched for miles, hidden like veins of steel and fire. In secret, engineers worked on engines faster than light, weapons sharper than anything seen before, and hulls coated in shadows that swallowed even starlight. No song of construction echoed outward. The galaxy saw nothing but empty space where humans had once been. Families raised their children not with tales of alien wonders, but with stories of betrayal and the promise of return. They laughed at us, parents whispered as children drifted to sleep, so you must grow strong enough to silence them. Those words became the lullabies of an entire generation. Schools turned into training grounds, not only of knowledge, but of will. Mathematics was paired with strategy, history with survival, science with defiance. Humanity was weaving its pain into armor. Centuries-old rivalries between nations withered into dust. The very differences that once divided Earth were reforged into strength. Russians worked with Americans, Africans with Europeans, Asians with South Americans, all under one banner, hidden and unyielding. Every culture brought something of value: innovation, endurance, cunning, discipline. Together, they created something greater than any single world had ever produced. Strange ships began to glide silently through uncharted systems. They bore no markings, no signal codes, no names that outsiders could trace. Some looked like hunters, sleek and fast, others like floating fortresses, bristling with power. They traveled not to trade or plead, but to map, to gather, to prepare. Along the edges of alien empires, pirate fleets began to vanish. Warlords who once laughed at stories of humans found their strongholds turned to wreckage in the void. Survivors whispered of shadows in the dark, ships that struck like ghosts and vanished before alarms could sound. Still, the Council dismissed the rumors. To them, humans were still crawling on their little planet, chasing dreams too big for their fragile hands. They did not see the pattern of missing fleets, the uncharted colonies that never returned, the silence that stretched too far. They saw nothing because humanity had chosen to vanish from their sight. And in that silence, the seeds planted in anger and unity grew into something vast, something waiting. An empire, not of light, but of shadow. An empire forged in secret, patient and merciless. An empire that would one day step out of the dark and remind the galaxy of the laughter it had forgotten. It began as whispers in the border markets, half-believed tales traded over mugs of burning liquor. A convoy of raiders had set out to pillage a mining station and never returned. Weeks later, scavengers found only twisted metal, blackened hulls, and the silence of cold space. No survivors, no black box signals, just the stench of precision in the destruction. The story should have died there, but more followed. Warlords with fleets of steel vanished overnight. Pirate nests, once thought untouchable, were discovered reduced to drifting ash. Some claimed to have seen the attackers, ships without lights that glided like predators. Others swore no ships were ever there at all, only shadows that swallowed entire fleets. The name slipped out from broken lips of survivors, dragged half-dead from escape pods. Terrans. The word spread like a curse, muttered by those who believed in ghosts. Officials dismissed it, laughing that humans had been broken long ago. Yet in smoky taverns and hidden ports, fear took root. Mercenaries refused jobs that led too close to Earth's forgotten borders. Traders altered their routes to avoid the silent sectors where stars burned, but no signals ever came back. The council ignored the warnings, too busy arguing over tariffs and old rivalries. To them, humanity was still a failed race, locked in its gravity well or at best clinging to scraps on Mars. But those who lived by the edge of the void knew better. Something was moving out there, something patient, silent, and merciless. The kind of enemy that did not announce itself, did not posture, did not speak, it only erased. And always, at the end of every rumor, the same chilling detail lingered. The attacks left no trace of plunder, no valuables stolen, no slaves taken, no resources stripped, only destruction, only silence. It was as if the shadows wanted nothing but to remind the galaxy of the laughter it once cast and to whisper that the debt was coming due. The colony on the edge of the spiral arm had no warning. Alien overseers marched through the streets with whips of plasma, driving men, women, and children into cages. Their cries echoed against steel walls, but no one came to help. The galaxy had always looked away when the weak were chained. The slavers raised their banners, confident the world would feed their empire for generations. Then, on the third night, the stars themselves seemed to dim. From the black horizon, shapes emerged, hulking, silent, and painted in shadows. No signals, no demands, no threats, just ships gliding through the void with the patience of hunters. The first alien cruiser turned its cannons, but before it could fire, its hull split apart as if torn by invisible claws. Fire blossomed across the night sky and panic rippled through the slaver fleet. The shadow ships moved without sound, their weapons flashing like lightning, each strike precise, each explosion final. On the ground, prisoners huddled in fear, unsure if this was another conquest. Then the cages split open with bursts of energy, locks falling apart under beams of light. Humans stepped out, not in rags, but in dark armor that caught no reflection. Their voices carried commands, sharp and steady, guiding the freed to safety. No flag of Earth was raised, but in the hands of the liberated, scraps of cloth were passed around, old banners, blue and white, symbols long mocked. When the last slaver ship fell burning into the sea, silence returned. The Shadow Fleet gathered its survivors, repaired nothing in sight, and vanished as quickly as it had come. In the smoke, the people whispered a single truth to each other, eyes wide with awe and disbelief. Humanity had returned, and this time they were not asking. They were taking back what was theirs. Panic spread through the council when the first reports arrived. Worlds once loyal to ancient empires were raising new banners, swearing allegiance to an unknown power. At first, the politicians laughed, dismissing them as rebellions or local uprisings. But the laughter turned to silence when entire sectors changed allegiance overnight, not by chaos, but by choice. The freed colonies spoke of protectors in the dark, of fleets that struck like ghosts, and of commanders who never lost. The word spread faster than any council edict: humanity. Meetings grew heated, delegates shouting over one another as more proof arrived. Hollow projections of sleek black warships hovered in the council chamber, their designs unlike anything known. Weapons glowed along their spines, engines pulsed with unnatural speed, and their movements showed coordination that bordered on instinct. This was not a desperate species clinging to survival. This was an empire, patient and prepared. A historian whispered what no one wanted to hear. The humans had been gone for more than a century, long enough to raise not just a fleet, but generations forged for war. The council had dismissed them as broken, but the rejection had only driven them deeper into the shadows. Now those shadows stretched across the stars, uniting the weak, sheltering the exiled, and frightening the mighty. Alien merchants closed their trade routes, warlords abandoned strongholds, even pirates began to swear loyalty rather than face annihilation. It was not conquest in the old sense. It was inevitability. The galaxy had left humanity no place among them, so humanity built one of its own. And when it stepped into the light, it did so not as a pleading race, but as an empire already older than its enemies realized. They called it many names, but one echoed the loudest, whispered in fear and awe alike: the Shadow Empire. The council chamber was no longer filled with laughter when the humans returned. The vast hall, once a place of mockery, now trembled under the presence of fleets orbiting above. Through the great windows, the delegates could see the dark silhouettes of ships blotting out the stars, thousands strong, each one capable of reducing a world to ash. The same ambassador who had once walked out in silence now entered again, his hair gray, his steps steady, his eyes burning with the weight of history. He did not come alone. Behind him marched armored guards, their faces hidden, their movements sharp and precise. The silence of their boots echoed louder than any insult once thrown at him. Delegates shifted uneasily, whispering to one another in voices edged with fear. No one laughed this time. No one dared. The ambassador's gaze swept across them, and many looked away, unable to meet his eyes. He said nothing at first, letting the silence gnaw at them, letting them remember. Finally, his voice rang out, calm but carrying iron. He did not beg for entry, nor offer apologies. He spoke of the crimes committed under the council's watch, the colonies left in chains, the people mocked and abandoned. He spoke of every scar humanity had carried into the dark and forged into strength. The golden-scaled lord who once mocked humans sat frozen, his proud head bowed low. Around him, the once mighty counselors fidgeted in shame and dread. They had believed rejection would bury Earth, yet here stood its answer, stronger than their oldest empires. Outside, every delegate knew that fleets of their own worlds had already sworn to humanity's banner. They could not resist, not with force, not with pride. The ambassador gave them a choice that was no choice at all. Accept humanity not as petitioners, but as equals, or be left behind in the shadow of the new empire rising before them. His words were not threats, merely truth. For the first time in the council's long history, its members listened in silence, not out of respect, but out of fear of what they had created. The reckoning had come, and humanity stood tall in the very place where it was once cast out. The stars burned differently now. Where once the galaxy looked upon Earth as a forgotten child, it now bowed beneath the weight of an empire born in darkness. Worlds that had mocked humanity sent envoys with gifts and oaths of loyalty. Those who resisted vanished into silence. Their fleets dissolved into wreckage, scattered across the void. No speeches of vengeance were needed. No declarations of supremacy shouted into the cosmos. The truth was written in the fear that filled alien hearts when they saw black-hulled warships drift into orbit above their worlds. Humanity did not seek to mimic the old empires with their palaces and empty pride. Their empire was built on steel, discipline, and unity. Every shipyard that burned beneath Mars, every hidden colony on forgotten rocks, every soldier raised in secret halls now stood revealed as part of a single design. The galaxy had forced them into the shadows, and in the shadows they had learned patience, silence, and strength. Now they stepped into the light not as one species among many, but as the architects of a new order. Children across alien worlds learned new words in their schools: Terran, empire, obedience. The same races that once spat on humanity now sought places in their fleets, their armies, their trade networks. Even in their fear, they admired what humanity had become, because nothing in living memory had united so many worlds under one banner. The old council still met, but it was an empty formality. True power lay elsewhere, in the command rooms where human leaders charted the future of the stars. The ambassador who had once been mocked stood at the heart of it all, his face lined with age, his eyes still sharp. He had carried the memory of laughter for a lifetime, and now he watched as the galaxy itself carried it as a curse. The age of humiliation was over. The galaxy no longer asked if humans belonged. They no longer dared to ask at all. The future stretched wide, endless and bright, and within that horizon humanity stood unchallenged. The Shadow Empire was not a dream or a threat. It was reality. And from that day forward, every star shone beneath its shadow.